The governor's race just got more crowded. Ahead on Face the State, Republican biotech entrepreneur Vivek Ramaswamy now entering the highly contested race. His message as he hits the ground running and how other candidates are responding. And from overhauling marijuana regulations in Ohio to investing your tax dollars in cryptocurrency, a look at the major policies gaining traction and friction in the Statehouse. Laying out their agenda, the Ohio Legislative Black Caucus is focusing on justice, education, and health and safety. Two members join me in studio to talk about their priorities for this General Assembly. And as a police officer, she saw firsthand the trauma created by human trafficking. That's why she created a law to punish those who pay.
This bill, we introduced it basically to ramp up the penalties on the job.
But we wanted to know, is it working? Ahead, our findings after a months-long investigation. Ohio's gubernatorial race is beginning to shape up. Vivek Ramaswamy is now officially joining Attorney General Dave Yost and former school board member Heather Hill as the Republican candidates for governor. Meanwhile, still only one Democrat is in the race at this time, former director of the Ohio Department of Health, Amy Acton. Thanks for joining us for Face the State. I'm Doug Petcash. We start with the governor's race as Ohio officially has another candidate hoping to be the state's top leader.
Thank you, Columbus, for coming out tonight. We're grateful for you.
Vivek Ramaswamy officially launched his 2026 gubernatorial campaign this past week, holding events across Ohio, including in New Albany. The biotech entrepreneur's announcement comes after he ran in the 2024 GOP presidential primary and after leaving President Donald Trump's Department of Government Efficiency last month. On the campaign trail, Ramaswamy laid out his vision for Ohio's future.
I will lead Ohio to be the top state in the country to start and grow a new business. I will lead Ohio to be the top state in the country to raise a young family. We will lead Ohio to be the top state in the country where we embrace capitalism and meritocracy instead of apologizing for it. We will lead Ohio to be the top state in the country that takes a hatchet to red tape, overregulation, and bureaucracy.
Meanwhile, the other candidates reacted quickly and critically after Ramaswamy's campaign announcement. Republican Dave Yost sent a statement to 10 TV saying, quote, "I welcome Mr. Ramaswamy to the race for however long he sticks around. We'll see if he actually stays in." Mr. Ramaswamy quit on President Trump and Doge on day one. He quit on Ohio and moved his company to Texas. And he quit his presidential campaign after a devastating fourth-place finish in Iowa. And Democrat Amy Acton posted on social media saying, quote, "Vivek Ramaswamy promises to do to Ohio what Musk is doing to America. Congress is poised to slash Medicaid, which covers 800,000 Ohioans, to give tax cuts to billionaires. Ohio needs a governor who rejects the billionaire agenda and puts the well-being of everyday Ohioans first," end quote. The Ohio gubernatorial election is scheduled to take place on November 3rd of 2026, so there's still a long way to go. Governor Mike DeWine is term limited and cannot run for re-election. Turning now to the Statehouse, the state Senate passed major changes to the state's marijuana laws. The bill now heads to the House. Republicans supporting the bill say it provides better oversight of testing, packaging, and advertising of marijuana and protects Ohio's kids from exposure to the drug. Democrats opposing Senate Bill 56 say the restrictions in it go too far. They argue it ignores what Ohioans wanted when they overwhelmingly voted to legalize recreational marijuana in 2023. Here's what the bill does. It calls for lowering the number of plants allowed to be grown at home from 12 to 6. It only permits the smoking or vaping of marijuana in private homes. The bill would also lower the THC levels from a maximum of 90% to 70%, making the marijuana less potent. It also caps the number of dispensaries in the state at 350.
Senate Bill 56 is a great bill because it's reasonable, appropriate. It cuts down on the illicit marijuana market, and it's truly about protection and safety of children.
What everyday Ohioans say they want, they pass a ballot initiative, they expect what they pass to be the rule of law, And I think they should be very upset about the fact that the Republicans are changing course on them and ignoring their voice.
State Senate Minority Leader Nikki Antonio says Democrats also want the bill to include funding for people looking to expunge their criminal records for minor marijuana possession convictions. Huffman says that will likely be addressed in budget discussions. Lawmakers say the excise tax on marijuana will also likely be addressed in budget discussions. Right now, it stands at 10%. Some Republican state lawmakers are now pushing to start investing taxpayer money in cryptocurrencies, such as Bitcoin. Bill's sponsor, State Representative Steve Demetrio, says Ohio has a lot to gain by investing in cryptocurrencies because their market values are growing quickly. House Bill 18 would allow the state treasurer to invest up to 10% of interim funds from the General Revenue Fund and 2 other funds in digital assets or cryptocurrencies. It does not mandate these investments. Interim funds are money in the Treasury that is not needed to meet current demands, so it can be invested. The treasurer could only invest in digital assets traded on major stock exchanges, such as the New York Stock Exchange. Committee members had questions and concerns about crypto market volatility and security of the taxpayer money.
How much do you take the risks into consideration?
Sure. I mean, volatility, just like any asset class, should always be a concern, especially when we're talking about taxpayer money. Look, we're not going to be day trading. If this bill passes, I don't think the treasurer, just like any of the investments they make, they're not planning on day trading. This is going to be a long-term asset to unlock value for Ohioans.
The bill also clarifies that state retirement system boards can make similar investments of pension funds. State Representative Erica White has reservations about the possible impact on police officers, firefighters, teachers, and others.
Pensions are what workers have in the state of Ohio when they're public sector. There's no Social Security. And so we just have to be very careful with something so volatile that could end people's retirement or their chances to retire.
Demetrio says the bill does include security measures to protect the taxpayer money. This bill still has a long way to go before coming up for a vote. Some Ohio lawmakers are now trying to eliminate ticket and arrest quotas for law enforcement agencies across the state. The bill has bipartisan support. A quota is a mandate of a certain number of arrests or citations an officer must meet in a specific time period. Republican Representative Kevin Miller is a former Ohio State Highway Patrol trooper. He says OSHP operates without quotas, and so should the rest of the state.
It's very simple. When we need to issue a citation, we will issue you a citation. When we need to issue you a warning, or we think a warning will suffice, we'll issue you a warning. That discretion should lie with our officers, not some arbitrary number that someone pulled out of the air and said you have to issue X amount of citations.
Lawmakers introduced a similar bill last year. It failed to make it out of committee. A massive transportation budget proposal is heading to the state Senate. The $11.5 billion budget unanimously passed the House. Most of that funding would be used in statewide highway construction and maintenance projects. It also appropriates $200 million for public transit. As for safety, the bill would establish a new road safety pilot program to protect construction workers. State lawmakers are also now proposing more changes to Ohio schools. 2 Republican representatives are reintroducing a bill that will require students to take a computer science course in order to graduate. And another Republican lawmaker is introducing new legislation that would increase instructional hours in schools. It's not clear how much support either of these proposals has. Lawmakers are putting forth dozens and dozens of bills as this new General Assembly picks up steam. The Ohio Legislative Black Caucus alone has more than 2 dozen. Next on Face the State, the focus this year for this legislative group with a history dating back more than 50 years. And later, 10 Investigates show how addiction can lead to a cycle of prostitution and human trafficking. But what happens to the people who are soliciting sex?
When you pull up, you know darn well that that's a prostitute. You know darn well that you're paying someone for a sex act, and you know darn well what you're doing.
This legislator wrote a law to punish those paying for sex, but are the courts using it? Why she's frustrated. Coming up on Face the State. Welcome back to Face the State. The Ohio Legislative Black Caucus was founded in 1967. Today, in this 136th General Assembly, it is made up of 17 members from both the Ohio House and the Senate. As Black History Month wrapped up, the members held a news conference at the Statehouse to lay out their legislative priorities for this General Assembly. They say they've introduced bills addressing criminal justice, tax issues, health and safety, education, and more. Here's a sample of the 26 bills in their legislative package: the School Bus Safety Act, a bill to increase the state minimum wage, the insulin price bill, legislation to prohibit housing payment discrimination, and authorizing a tax credit for handgun training and firearm storage. Joining me now to talk about the Legislative Black Caucus's priorities are State Senator Herschel Craig of Columbus and State Representative Dontavius Gerald, also of Columbus. They are also both in Democratic leadership positions as assistant minority leaders in the House and Senate, respectively. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here today.
Happy to be here.
Thank you for having us.
Well, Senator, first of all, I want to start with you. The Black Caucus was formed at a pivotal time in American civil rights history. In your opinion, how important was the formation of this organization nearly 60 years ago?
You know, absolutely essential. You've got to remember we just had the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, the Fair Housing Act of 1968. And those brave souls with all of the courage that they represented at that time, Representative C.J. McGlynn from Dayton, legendary legislator, and many others decided, for many of the reasons why we're going to be talking about today. It is essential, it is critical. I think it's the oldest caucus in this nation before the Congressional Black Caucus. And so I think looking at issues of health care and education and tax reform and housing, which is absolutely critical right now.
We'll talk more about that.
And so I appreciate your question, but it's absolutely pertinent that the work that we continue to do as the Ohio Legislative Black Caucus continues.
Senator, thank you. I gave that brief overview of what your legislative package is. Representative Gerald, what is the overriding theme of the legislation the caucus is putting forward this session?
Well, Doug, thank you for having me. Happy Black History Month. As I like to say, every day is Black History Month for me and for Senator Craig. The truth is affordability is on the top of minds of so many working families and families across the state. And for us as a caucus, we want to make sure that we do everything we can to make it easier for families to live, work, and literally thrive in this state. From raising the minimum wage, to addressing water quality, to addressing property taxes, increasing the homestead exemption, like things that we know will make a real difference in the material conditions of people in this state, we are committed to doing as a caucus. And we're also fighting against bad bills that remove history from schools, bills that remove the ability for us to have diversity, equity, inclusion, right? Things that will ensure that we are going to build the type of Ohio that puts all of us at front and center so that we all can thrive.
And Senator, you served on the Senate Select Committee on Housing last year, did a lot of work. There are bills coming forth from that. Working to find solutions for more affordable housing. Are some of the measures the committee came up with being put forth, and what's the goal of those measures in order to help Ohioans?
Doug, thank you for asking that question. You're absolutely right. We spent 6 months in the Senate. It's in a bipartisan way, traveling around the state, not just in urban areas, but suburban areas and certainly rural areas, where we found children and families sleeping in cars, and that's not okay. And so this is not an esoteric experience. Families, we recognize now we've got about 300,000 gap in units for accessible housing. Even in the great city of Columbus, which I love so dearly, we've got about 35,000 gap in affordable housing. And so the initiatives, the policy priorities that we're looking to move forward are absolutely critical. Representative Gerald mentioned certainly what we can do with homestead and other initiatives. The simple truth is I have working with Senator Blessing from Cincinnati, a circuit breaker bill. That's what we're calling it. We have a number of other initiatives with Senator Reynolds, because my hope is that we will get something done. It's not simply good enough to just sponsor a bill and let it sit on a shelf.
Yep.
We literally have to get something done for families because, and you know, in terms of African Americans, there's over 400,000 African Americans that are paying more than 50% of their income. But any family that when we talk about housing, and the renters are at this point, there's a disparity even with our renters. And, you know, of course, as you've seen, the rents have gone up exponentially.
No doubt about it. You talked about bipartisanship with what the Select Committee did. You know, in a situation where you have the House and Senate, the Republicans have that supermajority.
Trifecta.
So how important is it to, you know, work across the aisle and get, you know, support from Republicans for some of these measures that you're trying to put forth?
It's incredibly important. I think that these bills will not pass unless we have Republican support, quite frankly, because we're both Senate and the House, we're in a minority. And so, you know, for me, every single day as I go into the Statehouse, I am thinking about, and I know my caucus members are thinking about, how do we connect the work that we're doing in our particular districts with the real realities of families all across the state, and connecting with our colleagues to say, this does not just impact my district, this impacts your district too. For example, when we talk about lead lines, you know, we are one of the states that have the most lead service lines in the country. And so when you look at lead poisoning is not just impacting places like Cleveland and Columbus, it's impacting places in Scioto County, Claremont County, Putnam County. And so what are we doing to make sure that we're connecting with our colleagues to say, when we pass these bills, it doesn't just make a difference in my district, it makes a difference in every single household across the state of Ohio.
Ohio State University announced this week it's cutting diversity, equity, and inclusion programs and positions like universities across the nation. As you know, the Trump administration issued a Friday deadline to do this or risk you know, having their funding pulled. So Senator, I'll start with you. What do you think about this movement to eliminate DEI programs and positions?
Doug, I'm deeply, deeply troubled by that. The question becomes whether or not it's censorship, and many of us believe that. Here's the thing regarding DEI. It serves veterans, it serves the disabled, it serves lots of folks. And those that have benefited from it, they didn't get a handout. They worked for that. And many of those students have been exceptional. And so this whole question, and what is it doing? And I fundamentally believe it is hurting not the students of Ohio, it's hurting our state, and it's certainly hurting our future. Deeply troubled by it. We've got so many things that we need to be doing as a legislature. We've talked about this housing issue. We've got these critical issues of health around our state. We've got compelling issues around education and fairness and around that issue. We've got these large, very serious issues, and we need all hands on deck. And so I am deeply troubled by it. And I know that my colleagues in the House are as well. The Senate, as you know, we took a position. All 9 members of my caucus stood on the floor of the Senate, raising this issue and the serious nature of this issue.
Representative Gerald, your take?
You know, I'm hurting for students today, quite frankly. When we think about the moral scholarship, when you think about the Appalachian scholarships that are likely to be pulled, or if students are not going to likely get those scholarships moving forward. When I think about the Hale Center and every single student that walked through that building who said it was because of this belonging that happened in these programs, in the community that was built, that I was able to actually successfully graduate from The Ohio State University. And so I am deeply troubled, and I know many of the alumni are deeply troubled about what is going to be the next step. You know, just think about this, Doug. There was a report that came out that talked about the largest school, one of the largest schools in the country, had some of the smallest enrollment for Black and brown students, right? I do not want to go back to those days. I believe that The Ohio State should think about how we're going to accept all students, support all students, and uplift all students. And if these programs made a difference in the lives of these students, then we should not be taking those programs away.
Representative Gerald, Senator Craig, thank you again for coming in today and for your time. I really appreciate it. We'll have to end the conversation there.
Thank you.
All right, Doug, thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, next on Face the State, preventing prostitution. There's a law on the books to crack down on Johns, but is it working? 10 investigates. At our first 10 Listens town hall, community members in the Hilltop brought up safety concerns about prostitution. After a months-long investigation, 10 TV has answers about what lawmakers, the city, and community members are doing to hold the ones soliciting the prostitution accountable and make the streets safer. Rochelle Aline with our 10 Investigates team explains.
In November, we showed you how addiction can lead to a cycle of prostitution and make people vulnerable to human trafficking. But what happens to those who are soliciting those services? Well, after a viewer question, we went digging, and the answer might be controversial.
Nobody wants to stand out in the corner and sell themselves for drugs or money or whatever they're doing it for.
And yet right here in central Ohio, that's exactly what's happening. It's a cycle Representative Cindy Abrams saw firsthand as a police officer. And when she was elected to state office in 2019, her first bill aimed to toughen the punishment for the people paying, better known as Johns. It made it a misdemeanor with up to 6 months in jail.
When you pull up, you know darn well that that's a prostitute. You know darn well that you're paying someone for a sex act, and you know darn well what you're doing.
10 Investigates wanted to see how well the bill is working. Our team pulled all of the cases for engaging in prostitution filed in Franklin County Municipal Court from May of 2021 to October of 2024. We found 456 closed cases, and almost 80% were knocked down to a lesser charge of disorderly conduct. Why are they getting pled down?
On the demand side, on the male side, typically men, how do we educate the men of the dangers of human trafficking and exactly what act they're engaging in?
City Attorney Zach Klein says they're focused on education. They make first-time offenders take the Franklin County Solicitor Education Program. It's run by the organization She Has a Name.
Human trafficking is a business. It operates on the law of supply and demand. And if we're only caring for survivors after they've come out of being traumatized, then we're never actually stopping the problem from happening.
Over the last 20 years, the program has worked with more than 1,000 men. But it's tough to track success because they primarily deal with first-time offenders. But organizers say anonymous surveys offer them a glimpse into how it's working.
Over 3/4 of them said, because I know now that many people engaged in prostitution are there by force or have experienced trauma, I'm not going to engage in this again.
But if somebody's watching this and they feel like that's too lenient, what response do you have to somebody that's saying, okay, I get that, but can there not be both, a harsh punishment and education?
I understand there may be criticism to this, but the data shows that our methodology is working. And if the data changes, then we'll change.
But not everyone sees it that way.
I think it's frustrating for not just the victim when the crime is pled down, but it's frustrating for law enforcement.
We contacted the Franklin County Municipal Court to see if their lead judges would talk to us about what goes into their decision to accept these plea deals. They declined a sit-down interview but answered some questions via email. Their response says in part, quote, judges consider many factors in sentencing, including the severity of the crime, community safety, restitution, criminal history, and whether there is a joint agreement between the parties for a specific sentence. To read their full statement, head to 10tv.com. In the studio, Rochelle Aline, 10TV News.
And that is all of our time for this Sunday morning. Thank you so much for joining me for Face the State. I'm Doug Petcash. I'll see you next Sunday at 11:30.